The big game of round 11 in the candidates today was between Vladimir Kramnik and the leader Vishwanathan Anand. Could Kramnik upset Vishy? Let's have a look. Well, after his disastrous loss yesterday, Kramnik decided to play an opening that was very familiar to him. So today he played the Catalan. So no messing about, something very solid, something he has tremendous experience with. And it's the absolute main line, so Vishy playing solidly as well. He has no need to experiment in his position. And now knight e5. Well, this is something of a sideline. Normally, instead of knight e5, of course, you pick up the pawn with the queen. But it's a tricky move. Kramnik has quite a lot of experience with this. Now, the idea is that instead of going on an adventure with the queen, you try to pick up this pawn with the knight instead, and that way your queen doesn't get pushed around. And of course you're opening up the long diagonal for the bishop. But black has a very good counter here, and that is knight c6. This is a very well-known pawn sacrifice. Let's see exactly why black is giving up this pawn here. So these moves are very standard indeed. And here, the main moves are queen c2 or queen a4, and Kramnik has vast experience with these moves. And now black can counter with c5 or e5. So basically, black is probably giving up a pawn, but for it, you could say that white's king has been weakened because he's given up this bishop that protects his king, but also black is ahead in development. But today Kramnik plays something a little bit different. So he wants to capture with the pawn with the knight. Makes a lot of sense. So this is rather unusual. And Anand thought for some time and came up with this move. Okay, this looks very logical. You're breaking down white's centre and opening up the position. As black has pretty good development, that's a good idea. Kramnik took and hit the queen, which swung over to the king's side. So now there's a threat of playing knight g4, threatening mate and threatening the bishop. So f3 is, well, almost forced. Good idea, covering g4 and also closing the long diagonal. Anand thought for some time. It's not absolutely simple. He would like to protect this pawn on c4. But actually in this case, this is rather good for white. The bishop is attacked, has to move back, and then white can take on c4. Vishy came up with a really nice idea, c3. So he just gave this pawn up. So white's pawn up. But then he swung his queen over. Excellent move. So basically the queen isn't really achieving much on h5 anymore, but swings over to attack the knight and attack the pawn. Now if white could play this move, this would be good, but black has a very nice counter, queen c7, hitting the knight, but also covering these squares. So the knight, well, the knight's in some trouble. If it's protected, then the bishop hits, and you can see this pawn is vulnerable. This is much better than, well, for example, playing in this position, queen takes c3, in which case, well, then white has something to play for. Okay, let's go back. So after queen a5, Kramnik has a slight problem here. What does he do about those pawns? Well, he played his queen over, protecting both of them. But it's not a very pleasant square for the queen. You know, being assigned to miserable protection of this knight, and the knight is also very poorly placed. You can see that very clearly after this bishop move, cutting down here, and you can see that the queen breaks the connection between the rooks, so not easy for them to come into play, and black has really easy development here. Kramnik advanced, but, well, this pawn is dropping basically. Here Kramnik decided it's time to simplify, and Vishy kept chopping. He was happy to, and in this position, although white is still a pawn up, you can see black's activity is quite enough to balance that. Knight came back. I mean, black could possibly even try to play on in this position. Vichy took on a2, but it's possible to play like this. There's actually a really nice trick. Now here I think white should probably just play a3, and it's not absolutely clear what black is doing in that position. But if white is too eager to exchange, then have a look at this lovely trick, which actually Vichy pointed out afterwards. So we take the rook, and now black wins the queen back with this and remains a knight up. Nice little trick. But okay, Vichy didn't mess around. He just took this pawn here, and you can see 4 against 4 on the same side. It's completely level, and after a few more moves, the players reached a completely drawn position. So Anand edges closer to the finishing line. Afterwards, Kramnik looked really wrecked, and he was clearly not in any condition to play a really tough fighting game today. Anand was asked, how are you sleeping at the moment? Obviously, it's such a tense tournament, so it can be very difficult for the players to relax. And Vichy, really calm, said, I sleep between 7.5 and 9 hours a night. And Kramnik kind of smiled and shook his head and said, if I slept that much, I'd have 100% in this tournament. He clearly looked like a man who needed a really good night's sleep. Let's look at one more game from this round, and that's the game between Topalov and Karjakin. Well, Topalov, always a fantastic fighter. In this position he has white, and he has space advantage on the queen side. This bishop also looks quite good hitting here, but black is not badly placed. He has the potential to create a passed pawn on the king side. I mean, I would say chances are roughly balanced, but okay, Toppy, he went for it. He started with b5, so this will really fix this pawn here. Karjakin switched the rook across. That means that potentially he can trade and gain the open file for his rook. So actually Topalov has to be a little bit careful here. But he had planned something quite vigorous in this position. Sacrificing a pawn. If this is taken, then bishop takes b6, and I think we can see that, well, white has benefited from that. Passed pawn supported by the bishop is quite strong. So Karjakin took here, but that allowed white to advance. So, well, white has a really easy plan here of just picking up the a-pawns. This is exactly what happened. So if black does nothing, then white is simply better. So Karjakin was forced to take this pawn on b6, but this loses material because of the pin. Now, black can't allow this bishop to be taken, so he had to take the bishop. Topalov took the rook, and here they've reached the time control, and both players kind of sat back. But they both soon realised that actually, although white has a rook for a bishop advantage, in fact, white is struggling to draw this position. It's very interesting. Basically, it's because of these two passed pawns, or potential passed pawns anyway. So white has to look after both of those. Crucially, this bishop is very well supported by this pawn here. So Topalov can't touch the bishop with his rook, can't hassle it. He played rook here. Now that means that the rook can either switch to behind the a-pawn or perhaps hassle the king or go behind the h-pawn. I think this is a good move. a4, and Toppy had a long think here. He needed to. It's a very tricky situation. Let me give you an illustration of what might happen if white is careless. So okay, the rook goes behind the pawn. black creates a passed pawn. I should say this is not best play for white. So the king comes back to cover the pawn advances. So you can see that the king can't approach this pawn. These two squares are covered. Rook takes the pawn and a3. And the problem is that black has security here. The king can't move. The rook is tied to defending the a pawn. And now the king marches in, and this is a really simple win for black. You can just take pawns and support this one. So let's go back. I mean, it might have been possible to defend in another way there, but okay, instead Topalov played king d1. He planned something else. And h4. And a check. Now if the king comes back, then it's actually possible to take here. So the king has to maintain protection of the g-pawn. Now g4, very interesting strategy from Topalov. So in this way he's hoping to block the king out, shut the king out of his position. Now there are lots of tries here, but let me show you something that's kind of typical. Bishop here, looking to perhaps advance. Now, if white is careless, then the black king can enter the position. This is very nasty. And take here, and got two passed pawns, and that will probably be the end. But actually, it is possible for white to defend this. Like this. And, well, if the bishop comes back, then you check, and that's absolutely fine. We're basically repeating the position. So, okay, what about this move? Well, then we check, come behind, and the king comes over, and this is good enough. Okay, let me show you what happened in the game. Bishop here. So now there's a threat to play h3 and block out the rook with bishop h4. So that's why the rook has to come here. Now this is not the most active square for the rook, but it is absolutely necessary to prevent this pawn advancing. So basically Topalov is constructing a fortress. And here Karjakin didn't find anything. I mean, one interesting idea is to play this. Let's just have a quick look and see what happens if black tries to make a breakthrough with e4. It's very close, but probably not good enough. Reminds me a little bit of Karjakin's fantastic endgame against Fiddler the other day, actually, where he also sacrificed an exchange. Okay, if the king can come in here and take this one, again, this looks very good. So the rook cuts the king out, and the pawn advances. Well, king a2 is probably precise, keeping the king on a light square. On a dark square, there are sometimes tricks on this diagonal. But this should be good enough to draw. And after this, white can actually create counterplay with c5, and there's enough counterplay with the e-pawn. So it's tricky, but should be tenable for white. In the game, really, Karjakin saw nothing and just advanced, but he didn't really attempt anything. White can just wait in this position. And, well, there's nothing doing. They just shuffle the pieces back and forth, and very soon the players agreed to a draw. There were a couple more moves, but basically nothing happened. So there we go. We have 4 draws today. Not the most interesting round, I have to say, but Vishy Anand will be very pleased indeed. So the scores are Anand on 7 points, Aronian on 6, Karjakin and Mamedyarov on 5.5 points. 3 rounds to go, and looking really good for Vishy now. He has 2 whites out of his remaining 3 games. So yeah, he looks like he's well in control.